Night shift gas station clerks of Reddit. What's the weirdest thing you've ever encountered? Story 1. My husband worked at a huge truck stop with showers and laundry. One night, two female truckers came in and paid for shower tokens. They started eyeing up the workers and went over to one of them, shoving $100 into his pocket and telling him there was a lot more if he joined them in the showers. Later on, he came out of the shower with wet hair and a couple of $100 richer. Story 2. When I was in high school, I worked at a rural gas station and garage. One evening, there was some pretty bad storms brewing, and it didn't take long for a fairly large group of people to stop at the station to find some shelter. I didn't think much of it as it wasn't the first time it had happened, but then the tornado sirens started blaring. All of a sudden, a bunch of adults and families were looking at little 16-year-old me for answers. There was no basement, so I did the first thing I could think of and shoved them all into the walk-in cooler. I shut us all in and rode out the storm. When it passed, I went out and there was a big plate glass window busted and some things were blowing around the store. All the people came out of the cooler and pretty much said, "See you later," and left. I was pretty much left there by myself wondering, what the hell just happened? Story 3. I had a friend who worked at a gas station. One night, someone came in and produced a gun, telling my friend to empty the register. Completely dumbfounded by the situation, my friend told him that he had to buy something first. This was because to open the register, an item from the gas station needed to be scanned at the register. According to my friend, they stared at each other completely silently and bewildered for a few seconds. After that, my friend had regained enough of his faculties to explain this to the robber. The robber then scanned a Twix, took all the money in the register, and left. Story 4. Years ago, I worked overnights at a gas station in a pretty bad neighborhood in Florida. On my first night working there, an older guy came in, walked up to the counter, and reached across, punching me in the jaw pretty hard. The guy I was working with chased him out of the store while I called the cops to send someone over. My coworker came back pretty quickly, looking frightened, and said to send an ambulance because the crazy guy just died outside. Emergency medical technicians and police came, and the guy was alive but had a pretty bad heart attack. Every other shift was pretty timid compared to that one. Story 5. One night, while working at a mobile gas station in my hometown, a middle-aged man who looked like he had just walked off of a golf course came in. He was obviously a little drunk, but drunk middle-aged men who golf are common tourists, so I paid it no attention. He approached the counter and asked me if there were any gay bars in town. I told him no, and that the closest one was in Provincetown, a gay hotspot that was an optimistic hour's drive away with traffic. He then asked me if I was interested in fooling around with him. I replied no, and in an attempt to soften the rejection, I joked, "I don't think my girlfriend would be too happy about that," which seemed to excite the guy as he redoubled his efforts. His big pitch was that he had an especially nice van that we could pull into in the garage bay to use. Granted, it looked like a nice van, but it didn't sway my stance. After another 5 minutes, he seemed resigned to his fate and left the store. I thought we were done and went back to reading. Half an hour later, I heard a car start up and leave the lot. I didn't realize he had just stayed in his van and was waiting for me. I figured it was creepy, but whatever, he's gone, so I put it out of my mind. A couple of hours later, I was closing up shop and had to go out on a ladder to change the prices on the sign for the next day. The town was deserted at this point, and all the lights at the station were off except for a couple in the garage. While I was up on the ladder, the same van screeched back into the lot. I was up on a ladder in the dark alone, not thrilled about this development. He hopped out and hollered, "I forgot to pay you." I figured that I had given him smokes or something and just forgot to charge him as I was rejecting his advances, so I asked him, "For what?" He replied, "I forgot to try and pay you for a good time." I paused. He yelled, "$2.50. It occurred to me that I could probably just take the dude's money and run, but I correctly assessed that that would be really stupid, so I yelled, "No, man. No means no." Still on the ladder. He yelled, "Jesus Christ. Fine," and peeled out. Thankfully, I never saw him again. Story 6. I don't know if this was necessarily weird, but more of a stroke of luck. During and after high school, I worked at this crappy gas station that closed up at 11 p.m. I started doing my cleaning duties when I noticed a penny on the ground. I picked it up and kept sweeping until I noticed a dime by the door. This wasn't unusual since people drop change all the time. As I was picking it up, though, something caught my eye as it blew past the door. I went outside, looked right, nothing, looked left, and there sat a fat wad of cash. It was nearly like $300 laying on the ground. Yes, I kept it. No one ever stopped by asking about it either. Story 7. I was a 7-Eleven night clerk for about 5 years when I was young. Nothing too outrageous happened. The big nightly event was the 2 a.m. rush, the cutoff for selling alcohol when I'd run a bar through the beer cooler doors. There were always a bunch of people coming in just before and always a few coming in after that would beg and argue, and I would just have to say no. One time around 3 a.m., an older drunk but well-dressed Mexican guy comes in, two really pretty girls with him, and argues and pleads with me to sell him some beer for about 15 minutes. He was oddly pleasant, seemed like a guy no one said no to, but I had to say no. He went out with the girls and came back in alone. He looked at me and smiled, pulled a giant wad of bills from his pocket and peeled off a 20, sat it on the counter, walked over to the cooler and pulled out a case of beer through the bars. Then, as I'm telling him I can't sell that to him, he reaches in his other pocket and pulls out a baggie of wags it in the air in front of me significantly, sits that on the $20 bill and says, "Este todo bien, mi amigo," with a wink and walks out the door with the beer. Another time around 3 a.m. again, these two young girls came in and wandered the store for about half an hour, laughing their asses off at everything. They were literally rolling on the floor laughing, reading the labels of the candy bars and stuff like that. I talked to them enough that they told me they'd eaten some mushrooms. Finally, they picked out a couple of candy bars and a couple of sodas. At the counter, I rang them up and they realized they didn't have any money, which was hilariously funny, and they were on the floor laughing again. I bagged their stuff and told them not to worry about it. Sweeping the lot after they left, I could hear them still laughing down the street. Story 8. I worked overnights at an isolated gas station the summer after I graduated high school, way back in the late 1980s. This gas station had hot pizza in a clear case, and this case opened from the back. You'd open the case, pull out a slice, put it on a plate, and hand it to the customer. One day when I came in at 11 p.m., there were 3 slices left in the case, which was 3 or 4 feet down the counter from the register. I had one piece for dinner, then went about working my shift, which consisted of standing at the register waiting for people to wander in. And it was a slow shift. I had only 4 or 5 customers in a couple of hours. Not a busy shift by any means, and most just wanted lottery tickets to pay for gas or grab a pop. But by 1 a.m., there was no one in the store or at the pumps, so I got started neatening the store, always in eyesight of the front counter, the register, the lotto machine, and the pizza case. And no one came in for the hour I was schlepping around, trying to make it look like I was working. Figuring the pizza was pretty well dried out by then, I went to throw it out. When I opened the case, there was just an empty tray. Somehow, 2 slices of, or probably 5 hours old pizza had disappeared. Now, the only way to get into the pizza case was to get behind the counter, and to do that, you had to punch in a code, and then the door would buzz really loud and unlock. In other words, you couldn't just reach around the corner and get to the pizza. I scratched my head, spent the rest of my shift nervously worrying that there was some rando pizza-eating hiding in the store, and when a sheriff's deputy came in around 4 a.m., I asked him to check the building for any intruders. He didn't find anyone. Before leaving at the end of my shift, I wrote a note to my boss detailing what happened, then went home. When I came in for my next shift, he was there waiting and told me he had reviewed the video. There were cameras aimed at the front of the counter, door, and over the store, and played it back for me. It showed me ringing out a customer, then going and neating up the shelves. Meanwhile, on the front counter camera, a couple of minutes after I left the counter area, the camera got shaky and then went static for 30 seconds or so. When it came back on, the pizza was no longer in the case. It never happened again while I worked there, which was for another 6 months or so, and we never did figure out what happened. Story 9. Not a gas station, but a train station cafe. There were overnight works going on, so we stayed open until 1 or 2 a.m. for the builders. One night, this older gentleman comes in, well-dressed, and asks for a coffee, but can't pay when I make it. I give it to him anyway, since I'll just throw it out otherwise, and he asks me for some cake. I refuse, and he goes, "I sing for my supper," and then starts to belt out Frank Sinatra right there in the shop, and he just won't stop. He's there for like half an hour. I tried to get security to look after him because he clearly wasn't all there. I found him later singing for the builders who were giving him sandwiches. Eventually called the local police who got him supervised until he could catch a train home in the morning. Story 10. I don't work the night shift exactly, but this'll work, so my store closes up at 10 p.m. I came in one morning around 4:45ish to find an old Native American man passed out in our kitchen. Now we have a rather large kitchen because we work next to an industrial area with lots of truck drivers and oil field workers who start their workday early, so we make lots of food for breakfast and lunch. So I called the police because what the hell am I supposed to do? There's a very bad neighborhood behind the store that's constantly hit by drug busts, like hard shit. Plus we find bloody needles in the bathrooms all the time. The police showed up like 15 minutes later with some paramedics and the guy was just asleep. LOL. Apparently, he came in around 9:30 p.m. the night before to use the bathroom and got locked in when the 2 night shift employees locked up. He didn't have a phone and didn't think to look for hours, so he got a 6-pack of beer out, ate some of our bread, and went to sleep next to the grill. Story 11. This is a secondhand story, but you reminded me of it. So my friend was working at this gas station around 1 a.m. Small town, not a lot of diversity here. And then this white van pulls up and out piles like 10 big black dudes. They all run into the gas station as one. Suddenly, in a thick Jamaican accent, one of the guy yells out the door to the one left behind filling the tank. "Hey mom, what you want to drink?" My friend relaxes, knowing that he's safe. My friend realizes he might be a racist. Story 12. I was a 19-year-old female working the night shift who was grabbed from behind by a guy. He was the only one at the store at the time with an attempt at sexual assault. I was a gym rat, and he quickly realized it wasn't going to be easy. He let go, profusely apologized, and pleaded for me not to call the police. I got his license plate number and called my buddies from the department who were able to stop him about an hour later. I found out that he had just been released that day from federal prison after serving time for a sexual assault charge. Story 13. One night, before pay at the pump gas stations, I bought some gas and saw that the clerk was my high school friend Dan, whom I hadn't seen in a couple of years. So we had a sort of reunion through the pay slot under the glass before he buzzed me inside. I commented on how bulletproof the place looked, and he said it was supposed to be. I was on my way home from a girls' night out and had nothing to do, so I sat on a stool and we traded what we knew about people, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, a guy in a black hoodie just materialized at the pay slot, and I clearly heard the words, "All the money, have a gun." Inch-thick glass or not, I was ready to freak out, but I heard Dan's calm voice. "I'm sorry, sir, but company policy is that I have to see the gun or I could lose my job." The guy held his finger up like, "Just a sec," and fished out this big black handgun from his cargo pants. He presented it in two hands like he was looking upon it. I could see a big screw at the bottom of the grip, which looked funny, but what did I know? Dan, calmly, again, said, I'm sorry, sir, that's just a pellet gun and that doesn't qualify." The would-be robber packed up and left, muttering as he went. Dan called the cops and saw that I was shaking. He gave me a hug and pointed out that the pay slots were scooped into the counter so that a hand around a gun couldn't possibly fit under the glass. The owner had shown him with a plastic gun. I still thought that was pretty cool of my school buddy. Story 14. I used to work night shift at a gas station in Florida straight out of high school. It's a great job. It was so slow that the other cashier and I would hang out front and smoke cigs if we didn't have customers, and sometimes a friend or two would drop by. Well, one night we were doing just that when we saw a truck coming up the road being pushed by four guys and followed closely by a police car and another car. The truck was clearly out of gas, and having worked there for a while, this was more common than people think. We figured the police car was slowly riding behind them so that another car didn't slam into them. This was a normal procedure for the police in my city. Well, the exact moment the truck was pushed up to a pump, a whole swarm of police officers flew into the only entrance of the gas station, completely blocking it off. All of the cops were now aiming the AR-15s and Glocks at the guys who pushed the truck, yelling at them to get on the ground and not move. One of the guys started reaching into the truck, and I thought he was about to get blown away. I should mention that the angle of attack put us in the line of fire. After they arrested two of the guys, the other two were just good guys helping push the truck, we found out that they had robbed another gas station up the street. Apparently, the truck's description didn't match, but they got the license plate right. And when the cop pulled behind the truck to make sure they didn't get hit, he ran the plates and called for backup. They should have gotten gas and the money, in my opinion. I used to love that job. Story 15. I worked at a gas station about 2 or 3 years ago. One night, a random guy came in, bought his items, and then lingered around the store for a while. I was behind a glass, so I wasn't that worried, but I still prepared to call the police because after 45 minutes and it was just becoming 3 a.m., that was a bit weird. But about 15 minutes later, a regular customer came in and started yelling at me because it was after the legal time for me to sell alcohol. The random lingering guy, we'll call him Rob, started yelling at the man and told him I'm his little sister, so he couldn't talk to me like that, and ordered him to leave. The rude customer left, and that was when Rob introduced himself. He said he was lingering because he was bored and had nowhere to go and nothing to do. A few of his friends showed up a while later, 2 regulars, and they cleaned the parking lot and changed the trash cans outside. Surprised the heck out of me because I honestly did not ask them to, but I wasn't going to argue because it was dark and I was thankful I didn't have to do it. Rob and his friends left after a while, and then Rob came back 2 hours later, about 30 minutes before my shift ended, with some girl's bra, to check on me and see how the rest of my shift went. He then came back to check on me other times after that, and nights he was bored and had nothing to do. He was a really sweet guy. Story 16. Once there was a guy that came in, probably around 18. He came up to the counter and asked if he could put on a uniform and take a selfie. At first, I hesitated, but he mentioned that he made plans that he was now trying to fall back on, so I decided why not. Another time, a man went pump to pump to take all the pamphlet ads with cards attached to them. My coworker and I could never fathom why he would want or need all of those. And the best one would be when a guy came in, at first with all of his clothing on. He never said a word, but just gestured to where the bathrooms were and left. He was fumbling over himself and appeared to be under the influence of drugs. And then the second time he came in, he didn't have a shirt on. He was missing his shoe and sock on one foot, and he was covered in mud and water. Again, he gestured to the bathroom, and it wasn't until he started screaming inside the bathroom that I decided to go check on him. When I knocked on the door, he answered as if it was his house, cracking the door. I asked if he was all right and if he wanted to wait in the lobby. We shared the building with the Dunkin' Donuts. Eventually, we called the police, and they showed up and took the guy away on a stretcher. Story 17. Not weird, but the overnight crew used to share stories about attempted robberies. This took place in a rough neighborhood in Canada, so while it may be safe by US standards, there were plenty of drugs around. First, my own amusing robbery. The guy was really nervous and walked along the back of the store, unaware of the cameras, before writing a note on our lotto paper with our pencils in full view of the camera and giving it to me as a robbery note. The note read something about his wife being in the hospital and needing money for medical bills, which makes no sense in Canada, but I didn't question it. When the police arrived, they and my manager showed me just how much footage we had of him in the store. He was arrested the following morning. My second robbery ended up being hilarious, but corporate didn't find it funny. This guy comes in and asks for a favor. This is common: cheap muffin, cheap coffee, some water, or use of the staff washroom. So I ask what he needs. He tells me that he needs money. Panhandling or begging in stores is not allowed, so I told him to leave. And then this is when he threatened to pull something out and hurt me while gesturing with his hand in his pocket. I exclaimed, "Oh, you're robbing me," and opened the register, giving him the money. Now, this was enough for the other overnight guys to get a laugh, but corporate thought I was protecting the store. So someone from the head office came in, spoke with the manager, regional manager, assistant manager, and then me. This last conversation was the shortest, as 2 minutes in, she realized she wasted a lot of money on her trip since I was not protecting the store, but just a bit naive. My third robbery is not funny, but two things that came from it are: we had a door buzzer, which gave me time to turn around as two guys with leather knives rushed the counter. Give me the money now," one of them yelled while wildly swinging his knife. I felt true fear, and the lizard brain inside me took over, and I shouted back, "I can't, you're in the way," or something like that, likely with a lot of panic swearing. The calm robber grabbed the other's coat and yanked him back. I handed over the cash, and off they went, or tried to. One guy escaped without issue, but the other tried to open the locked door with his palm. The police photographer was impressed with how textbook perfect the handprint was. The next day, one of the was quite upset. I later learned that she turned in her boyfriend for robbing me. He was the one waving the knife wildly because I was always nice, treated her with the respect of a person, and would let her warm up in the store on February nights. The last one was actually useful. You don't get robbed when people are in the store. The other overnight guys and the manager laughed endlessly that a string of crimes was solved because a turned in her boyfriend for robbing a decent clerk. Those are just my stories. The other guys had their own stories about skinny trying to rob them with cinder blocks, someone coming at them with a syringe of AIDS, and countless failed attempts by robber/shoplifters on the slightly, absolutely terrifying Pakistani ex-military guy. I have fond memories of working there when I was a student, but boy, am I glad it's not my lifelong career.